The trial of Richard Bruno Hauptmann remains one of the most famous cases of all time. His crime involved snatching the infant of a famous aviator in the dead of night. The intrigue and allure of this controversial kidnapping case drew massive media attention and turned it into a hugely public ordeal, which by the end had massive crowds gathering from all over to witness the trial. On the cold, rainy night of March 1st, 1932, sometime between 8 and 10 p.m., Charles Lindbergh Jr. was taken from the second-floor nursery of Charles and Ann Lindbergh's home in Hopewell, New Jersey. The child's nurse discovered the disappearance and reported it to the parents at around 10 p.m. While searching for their child, the Lindberghs found a ransom note left in the nursery, demanding $50,000 in various bills. "Dear sir, have $50,000 ready. $2,500 in $20 bills, $1,500 in $10 bills, and $1,000 in $5 bills. After 2 to 4 days, we will inform you where to deliver the money. We warn you from making anything public or notifying the police. The child is in good care. Indication for all letters are signature and 3 holes." After the family notified police, the state started an investigation and authorities searched the scene. Investigators found traces of mud on the floor of the nursery, as well as footprints on the ground below the nursery window. These footprints, however, were never measured, which was a critical oversight by one of the investigators on the scene, Corporal Joseph Wolfe. Also found at the scene were 2 broken-apart sections of a ladder that was used to reach the second-floor window of the nursery. This indicated that the ladder had broken during the ascent or descent. Unfortunately, no fingerprints or bloodstains were found at the scene. Employees and neighbors of the Lindberghs were questioned, and the family spread word that they were ready to begin negotiations with the kidnappers. Charles received a second ransom note on March 6th, raising the ransom demand to $70,000. The governor then called a police conference to discuss their approach. The Lindberghs received the third ransom note on March 8th, stating that the negotiation through an intermediary chosen by the family was not acceptable. Meanwhile, Dr. John F. Condon from the Bronx, New York City, a retired school principal, published in a newspaper that he was willing to act as an intermediary and pay an additional $1,000 ransom. The next day, Dr. Condon received the fourth ransom note, which stated that he would be an acceptable messenger. The Lindberghs also agreed. On March 10th, Dr. Condon received $70,000 in cash from the Lindberghs as ransom, and immediately started negotiations for payment with the kidnappers. On March 12th, Dr. Condon received the fifth ransom note, leading him to another note hidden in a park. This note had instructions to meet at Woodlawn Cemetery to discuss payment of the ransom money. At the cemetery, Dr. Condon met with an obscured man who said his name was John. Dr. Condon received a seventh ransom note on March 16th, and an eighth on March 21st, insisting on complete compliance. On March 29th, the family's nurse found the infant's thumb guard near the entrance to the estate. The next day, Condon received the ninth note, threatening to raise the demand to $100,000. He received the 10th on April 1st, instructing him to have the money ready the following night. The 11th note arrived the next day, leading him to another note found underneath a stone in front of a greenhouse. Later that night, Condon met again with the man who went by John to bring down the ransom to $50,000. He handed this amount to the stranger in the form of mostly gold certificates, as well as some cash, and received a receipt and the 13th note, which had instructions that the child was being held on a boat near Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. The next day, investigators made 2 unsuccessful searches for the baby. Dr. Condon was sure he could recognize John if he ever saw him again. On May 12th, William Allen, a trucker, found the body of the infant, partially buried and mostly decomposed. The remains were found 4.5 miles from the Lindbergh home, near Mount Rose, New Jersey. The head was crushed, there was a hole in the skull, and multiple limbs were missing. The next day, the body was identified by the family and cremated in Trenton, New Jersey. The coroner's examination revealed that the cause of death was a blow to the head, and that the child had been dead for around 2 months. Handwriting experts concluded that the same person, of German nationality but having spent time in America, had written all of the ransom notes. Another good lead was centered around the ladder found at the scene. Investigators observed that it was crudely built by someone who was familiar with wood and mechanically inclined. The ladder had no fingerprints and didn't belong to any contractors that the Lindbergh had used. Experts disassembled the ladder and examined the wood types, tool marks, and the patterns made by nail holes, as well as sourced the woods to different factories. The findings were summarized in a report that played a critical role in the trial. A suspect was finally identified due to the fact that the ransom money had been delivered in mostly gold certificates. Gold certificates quickly started to become rarer and rarer as the Treasury transitioned away from them. On September 15, 1934, a man matching the description of an individual who had used multiple gold certificates in recent weeks paid a gas station attendant for 5 gallons of gas with a $10 gold certificate. The attendant was suspicious because of the rarity of these certificates and wrote the license plate number of the man's car on the bill. Authorities found that the car was registered to Bruno Richard Hauptmann from the Bronx, New York. Hauptmann's house was closely surveilled by authorities throughout the night of September 18, 1934, until around 9 a.m. the next day. Hauptmann left his home, got in his car, and was quickly arrested. After arrest, Hauptmann was found to closely match both John's description as well as the man seen at the gas station. He also had a $20 ransom gold certificate in his pocket and owned a Dodge sedan seen near the Lindbergh's home the day before the kidnapping. Police conducted a search of his home and found $1,830 in ransom gold certificates behind a board in his garage. They found another $11,930 of certificates in a tin can, also found in the garage. They also found Dr. Condon's phone number written above the trim of a closet door. And in the attic, there was a board that had been cut off, later identified as the board used to hastily repair the ladder. After Hauptmann's arrest, handwriting samples were flown to an FBI lab in Washington, D.C., where they were compared with the ransom notes. The lab's handwriting experts concluded that they were a match. The authorities also researched Hauptmann's background. He was a 35-year-old native of Saxony, Germany. He had a criminal record for robbery and had illegally immigrated to the U.S. in 1923 on board a ship. During his illegal stay in New York, he became a carpenter like he had been in Germany. Shortly after March 1, 1932, however, he began to trade stocks and never worked again. On September 26, 1934, Hauptmann was indicted in Bronx County, New York, on charges of extortion. Then on October 8th, he was indicted again for murder in Hunterdon County, New Jersey. Hauptmann's trial was set to begin on January 2, 1935 in Flemington, New Jersey. At this point, the kidnapping had garnered so much attention that by New Year's Day, Flemington was filled with over 700 reporters and thousands of spectators. Vendors looking to profit off of the visitors sold souvenirs for the case, like miniature kidnap ladders, locks of the Lindbergh baby's hair, and photos of the family. At 10 a.m. the next day, Judge Thomas Trenchard took a seat, along with Bruno Hauptmann and Charles Lindbergh. The jury was selected, and the trial of the century, or at least one of them, began. David Willent, Lindbergh's attorney, started with a very compelling opening statement to the jury. Then as he went to the window and down that ladder of his, the ladder broke. He had more weight going down than when he was going up. Trial proceedings were long and dramatic, with some highlights. At one point during his testimony, Lindbergh said that he heard a sound like an orange box falling off of a chair at around 9 p.m. During cross-examination, Hauptmann's attorney used a bizarre line of questioning. He suggested that the neighbors committed the murder because they were upset at Lindbergh for cutting off access to a forest they liked to hunt in. He then theorized that the nurse or another one of the family's employees could be to blame. He even tried to cast doubt on Mr. Condon. Questioning Lindbergh, he asked, "Did it ever strike you that a mastermind might insert an ad into the paper and answer it himself?" During the trial, the initial search of the Lindbergh's home came up, and Corporal Joseph Wolf testified about the footprints he found and was ridiculed during cross-examination for not taking measurements. Later in the trial, a witness who lived near the Lindberghs told the jury that he saw a man in a green car with a ladder in it glare at him as he passed his house towards the Lindbergh home. The witness was asked if the man in the car was in the courtroom, and he responded yes and pointed at Hauptmann. At that moment, a power failure sent the room into semi-darkness. Hauptmann's lawyer was quick to use this moment and declared that it's the Lord's wrath over a lying witness. The rest of the trial proceeded mostly normally, though still had dramatics due to the amount of media attention that the case had garnered. Finally, the prosecution's closing statement came, in which the attorney said that Hauptmann is either the filthiest, vilest snake that has ever crawled through the grass, or he is entitled to an acquittal. Finally, the judge gave the jury instructions and sent them out for deliberation. After deliberating for 11 hours and 7 minutes, jury foreman Charles Walton announced that the jury had found Hauptmann guilty of murder in the first degree. Judge Trenchard then announced that the defendant would be sentenced to death by electric chair. And with that, the 32-day-long trial was over. Hauptmann was interviewed several times while on death row, and always maintained his innocence. At one point, a newspaper even promised $75,000 to his wife and son if he would provide them with the details of his kidnapping, but nevertheless he insisted he was innocent. At 8:44 p.m. on April 3, 1936, Richard Bruno Hauptmann was executed by electric chair in New Jersey State Prison, 4 years, 1 month, and 2 days after the kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh, Jr.